Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. My name is Dr. Drum McNaughton, and I'm the CEO of The Change Leader, a management consultancy that helps university leaders create sustainable higher ed institutions through holistic approaches to strategic management, university academics and operations, change management, leadership, and governance. Our podcast brings you the latest in higher ed news, as well as some of the top experts in our profession who will share with you their perspectives on how you can grow your institution. Today we're going to talk about the higher purpose of higher education, educating the whole student. And there's no better person to talk with about this than Dr. Daniel Pugh Sr., who currently serves as Vice President for Student Affairs at Texas A&m University. In his role there, Dan oversees all non-academic areas of student support and engagement, including the Texas A&m Corps of Cadets, Memorial Student Center, Veteran Services, housing, student activities, arts and music activity programs, disability support services, and counseling and medical services, just to name a few. Dan's 30-year career in higher ed and government services has taken him to multiple Tier 1 universities, including the University of Arkansas, University of Tennessee, Virginia Polytechnic Institute, the University of Georgia, and Eastern Washington University. He also finds time to serve as the civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army in Texas, and before that in the same role in Arkansas. Dan's a very special person, and he gets it when it comes to higher ed and its higher purpose, and we're happy to have him on today's show. Good morning, Dan.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good. Yourself?
Doing well. All things good here in Aggieland.
Great. Well, I've been looking forward to this, especially since I got that article that one of your folks sent over to me, the Aggie core values, defined and redefined. It's a fabulous article, and I'd like to go into that in a little bit, but just to kind of start off, we find ourselves in a really interesting political climate where higher ed, at least in my estimation, is getting a bum rap when it comes to preparing students for the workforce. We're starting to look at things much more from a transactional versus a transformational light. And A&m, like the service academies, takes a holistic approach to education, that you're preparing students for life, not just for a job. And you see that with everything that you do as a Texas Aggie. Could you talk to us a little bit about the Aggie philosophy?
Oh, sure. And I really do appreciate your interest in Texas A&m and giving us a call. And yeah, it's a phenomenal place. If you look back from a historical standpoint, from 1876 with its founding, A&m has had a tight alignment, key alignment with with the military. And so for the first nearly 100 years, it was all male, all military. And some of the fundamental principles that arrived through that was preparing young men, predominantly Texas young men, to lead in the world. Some would go active duty and some would go into the workforce to help Texas gain its footing within the republic and the nation. So one of the principal pieces that was really empowering, enabling, and looking to the students for self-solutions, to identify problems and to begin to identify means by which to tackle those. And so that concept of student-led, student-run really began from the infancy of Texas A&m, whereby if you identify an item that's there, then it's really upon you to find a resolution to that and to work with your peers, to work with the administration, to work with others in the community to bring about some change. And that is really what's inherent today when you talk about really a philosophy here at A&m, really developing leaders for the next generation. And that means working with the students to ensure that they have the ability to identify those challenges that are there and the fortitude to attend to those and to galvanize groups and organizations around those to make a difference.
That's a fabulous way of going about it. And I remember the last time we spoke, you said there's a saying around Aggieland. What do you call an Aggie 5 years after they graduate? Boss.
Yes, sir. And again, it's reflective now with regards to the student employment rates that we have. Students that leave here are as in high demand as any in the nation. I think the last check, our students were the second most hired and valued, following another school out of the Northeast. And I think that's indicative of the quality and the talent that our students bring on day one when they leave here, prepared to lead.
I have no doubt. I actually, on my first class midshipman cruise from the Naval Academy, which there's a lot of philosophies very similar between the service academies and Texas A&M, there was an Aggie person going into his senior year, and he was as squared away as anybody I've seen.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that. If you look at the historical framework at A&M of how that's happened, and you go back from your generation and before, and I was fortunate yesterday to be down in Houston with the Holocaust Museum Houston, where A&M was recognized with an award for the Aggie liberators in World War II. To know that more than 20,000 Aggies stepped forward to serve in World War II and made an incredible difference in the outcome of that war on a global scale. And it was one of those pieces that one of those core values of selfless service that, that's what you do. There's an issue, there's a challenge, we're going to step in, we're going to make a difference. And that legacy has evolved over the 140 plus years of the university, but it's still resolute today that Aggies are going to make a difference.
That brings us to an interesting point, Dan. Let's talk a little bit about those 6 core values of excellence, integrity, leadership, loyalty, respect, and selfless service from the perspective of what they mean, but also how do you operationalize them? How do you get students inculcated into these values and provide them the lessons so that they can step out and be that second highest graduation rate and hiring rate when they leave school?
Yeah, Drum, thank you for the question about the core values. It's only been in the last 20 years that the core values have been set to paper, through the work of past presidents and staff here and students to be able to put those 6 core values down. It really was a look back at 100 years plus worth of history to say, who are we, where do we come from? The irony of it is that many schools did that in the late 80s and early 90s with their own codes and creeds, if you will, and few of them have stuck. But interestingly, I think what happened here with A&M with these 6 core values is they hit upon the head of that nail so well that they've really become the foundational pieces that through which we recruit students, through which we communicate with our former students. So on day one, as students begin to matriculate here, and by that I mean the first communications, you're exposed to those 6 core values. They are at various places around campus as well. They're engraved on different markers, different buildings. They hang outside on street lampposts. And the students will actually talk about those 6 core values. I think the critical piece is, as we've all begun to, how do you embrace those? How do you begin to embed those? Is, what are the real learning outcomes associated with those 6? And as you develop programs, as you review old programs, are you really touching on those 6 core points or one of those 6 core values? And if you do that, then you begin to have that conversation. And so that when we think about developing some new initiatives, we don't talk about, the baseline. We talk about it being excellent. And is it really true what's there? And the conversations surrounding, doing what's right and really that integrity piece of, well, what should we do? Well, what's the right thing to do? We don't talk about what's expedient. We don't talk about what might be in the best light for the university or what the students are trying to do. We talk about what the right thing to do is and really being an individual character. And that's sort of the first and foremost of what's there. So we do it when we have orientation. We do it when we have fish camp with students. We do it through all the in the residence halls. We do it through a variety of leadership training programs that are there. The students apply to be part of a freshman leadership organization that we call FLOWS. They're continually confronted with the concepts of these 6 core values and for them to be able to reflect upon that in their own personal value system. And how do those two align so that at the end of the 4-year experience or beyond, we really want individuals who can talk about those 6 core values with a very specific framework and how that led them to be able to achieve certain aspects of their undergraduate and even graduate experience.
That's a fabulous, fabulous thought around all those things and operationalizing them. One of the things that just struck me, what you said, was in the course development, you consciously look at what those 6 values are and you bring them into course development. I've never heard another university who does that type of thing.
Well, and again, I think certainly outside the classroom, we do it with tremendous regularity. And I think there are faculty that do that inside the classroom as well as they're looking at various aspects of learning outcomes that they're trying to achieve within the course. And again, that's come through time. If you think about how do you begin to evolve and change a culture, this is more about defining a culture that previously existed. So again, I think it's one of those that, we had a 125-year leg up, if you will, 120-year leg up. And so the adoption and the infusion of the construct of the 6 values was a lot simpler because they resonated. They were right for the institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember a story that you told me earlier about how there's a hierarchical, people move up into greater leadership positions throughout their 4 years there as an undergraduate. But you also told me about a situation where a young man or young woman, I don't recall which it was leading an entire assembly. There was a conference being put on, and this person was in charge of doing it instead of having a faculty or a staff member doing it. So you're giving them good leadership experiences while they're at school.
Right. And, one of my first exposures to it, and you think on your way in, you think you know everything about a place, or I think sometimes our hubris is a bit much that we think that's there. But I remember one of the first occasions that I traveled with the Fighting Texas Aggie Band, and we were down at NRG Stadium in Houston, and the stadium marketing group approached the band director and wanted to visit with him about the show and the run of show that would happen. And he stopped and said, "Not me." And he pointed to the drum majors and said, "They're in charge." And they were a little taken aback, thinking that, the adult was going to step in. But the fact of the matter is, he said, and quite literally said to them, "Hey, I got them here. They're in charge." And, it was the professional in the arena working with our seniors, cadets, a handful of them, who put all this together. And yeah, the capability was there, but it was one of those that they're in charge. We don't intervene in that framework. So there's story after story after story of those type of examples. And they don't always start out well. I mean, there are occasions where some students, they come into the university and they've not stepped into a role where they feel really comfortable yet, or haven't found a place. And then through diligence and the work ethic and the expectation we have, they find a way to sort of move into different roles, different groups, and again, to begin to assume greater levels of responsibility as they begin to narrow their focus. And again, that's just preparing them for that next step, whether they leave here as a cadet that's going to take over a unit in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines, or if they move into a corporate environment where they're going to be working or leading a team or part of a team, and you're going to see them step forward a little bit quicker because they know how to lead groups, how to achieve mission. They know what the points are, and they're able to make an impact immediately.
And that's what you expect of a leader coming out of a school, rather than what we're hearing from some businesses saying that the kids coming out are just not ready. You're not seeing that with your graduates. Your graduates are ready to step into a significant role within an organization, whether it be military, civilian, government. And that's a credit to the values that you put in and that holistic approach to education.
Yeah, I like to also think the sort of the stepped process internal to what we do here also is a value at the corporate level, because I think we hear a lot of stories of, they walk in here and they think they ought to be making 6 figures and having a VP title, or I think our students, I believe, have an understanding of the appropriate progress that needs to be made, where then you begin to receive the promotions and move on in advancement. And so it's not as if 6 months later someone's anxious and they're already thinking they're being undervalued. It's the value you bring to the organization, the work ethic you bring, the quality of the work. And when you do that, the rewards come with that because people see what's happening there. And so I think that philosophy and the approach here allows our students to be a bit more patient than others are in their professional growth and their expansion.
Well, you've provided a model for them for their 4 years as part of the either the core or just as a regular student there on the quad. And most universities, I would say the vast majority, I'd probably say it's over 95%, don't do that type of thing. It's up to the student to find their own way through a program, whereas yours tends to be very conscious, very deliberate with outcomes that include things besides just, I know my subject matter that I majored in.
Correct. I think the universities as a whole, we'd like to do this. When I talk to my peers, that's the aspirational piece that's out there. And, even the things we do with our high impact practices here with regards to trying to get students to be in more deliberative processes as well, whether it's research projects with faculty or study abroad projects. or the nature of some of the work they do on campus and even leading experiences, whether it's in an academic area or in a non-academic area, is, how do you begin to reflect on those experiences? How do you begin to transfer those into professional preparation, skill sets and ideals? And if we can do that, and that's the goal, is that our students we want 75% of our students to have at least 3 of those while they're in undergrad here. And if we can achieve that, then we think everybody's going to have at least 1 or 2. We want more of that, where that real reflection's occurring and the growth that's transpiring, that's going to allow them to put that into a framework that's going to allow them to be more successful in the future, both professionally and personally.
And which makes perfect sense. In some ways, I shouldn't say in some ways, in pretty much all ways, culture is set from the top, but you have managed to bring it down throughout the entire organization. I want to focus a little bit on your student recruiting and your staff recruiting, because those are 2 critical pieces there. Let's talk student recruiting first. I know Texas does things a little bit differently with your 10% and 25% rules, but your enrollment you've always got a waiting list coming in.
Yeah, so I think this year we're compared to, we had the hurricane last year, so the application numbers are a little skewed. So looking back 2 years, we're already running 25% higher application rates than we did 2 years ago. And we think it's indicative of the product. I mean, that's the end of the day, the students see the value that they're getting out of here, the quality of the education and the experiences that they're going to have here that are going to let them be successful later. And so we're able to, we get 50,000 applications if this holds true, for what really amounts to about 10,000 slots. And so it's a highly competitive group, even within the top 10% that are automatic admits from the state of Texas that was placed in effect in the early 2000s. But we're getting the best out of the best from all the school districts from around the state. But we're still competing for that group as well to make sure they understand when you come here, that's that philosophy. These are the core values. And if you come here, this is what you're going to experience, and really articulating that. So we really do hope that on the way in, Aggies have already self-identified that's what they want to do and what differentiates us versus other universities in the state or around the nation. And if this holds up against easily anything in the state and certainly everything outside the state, that really we want Aggies to come here who are going to look at those values, look at that philosophy and say, you know what, this is the place that's for me. And so, some of it sells itself if you just, in all honesty, if we let students see our current students or future students see our current students, it's a slam dunk.
And how many of your students are actually, I hate to use the term legacy students, but how many of their parents actually attended A&M? Is there a large percentage?
It's not, you're not an automatic admit here any longer if you're a legacy. But there are a high percentage, it's over 25% that are legacy students, and maybe higher, by the way, my apologies. And the reality is there's such a priority of Aggies placed on that legacy experience that you see that play out with families wherever they go to school, that, you really focus on being in the top 10% or being in the top 25% with the applicable, the commensurate ACT, SAT scores that also allow you to be an automatic admit. And so we do see a great deal of that. But it's also, I think, the students have grown up. That legacy student understands that core value. And, I want to go back for a second. Think about this. Most of those legacy students that are coming here, when their moms and dads were students here, the 6 core values weren't articulated at that point in time. So you're talking about parents who may have had kids in the 1990s. I've got an 18-year-old born in 2000 who's going to go off to college next year. And it's, you think about that. So the core values weren't written yet. And yet those are the values the parents and the families have adopted. And so they grow up in that experience. And so over the course of that student's life, the 6 core values have all of a sudden become known to the families. They become adopted. When they come back to campus, they begin to see that with regularity. So I think it's a real tribute to what's there, that the families that actually grew up without the core values being written are still so committed to those core values and try to lead them in their day-to-day lives that their sons and daughters, by the time they get here, they're already Aggies.
It's the old argument, hereditary versus environment. And it sounds like with this, you've got both.
Yeah, it's an interesting framing of that. I may use that in the future. So, but it is both. It's a little bit of both. There's a joke here they talk about with regards to, drinking the maroon Kool-Aid. And some of them are just born with it in their veins. and they really do try to achieve to be a legacy student here. And just 3 years ago, the head Yale leader, Zach Lawrence, his great-great-great-great-grandfather was the first student at the university who arrived a day early, unbeknownst to him, and he slept next to a tree outside of the campus, and he was the first one to enroll here. And so you got that sort of legacy as well, from the first student all the way through current students now.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I'm sure that this type of, you've got to set that right culture. It starts in the families, obviously, with most folks, but then you've also got everyone that works at A&M, faculty who, arguably have the most interactions with students. How do you set that policy? How do you look for faculty members and even staff who also have those values? Is there something different or unique that you do?
Well, I think it's reflected in what we're looking for and the quality of the individuals that are there. And if you look at different job descriptions and postings that go out there and talking about the quality of the institution, remember that's the excellence. That's the absolute excellence we're trying to achieve, and the quality of the faculty member and staff member we're trying to bring in here to be able to perform at the highest level, to do so with the matter of ethic and integrity that is critically important to this institution. And the expectation they're going to be able to lead when they get here. We want them to do that. Part of that is how we make sure that when people are applying here, they get some exposure to what we're talking about. Certainly, first and foremost as well, we are an absolute outstanding research university at the highest levels, and AAU and all the other attributes that we really want the faculty to be really successful here from a research standpoint. And that goes hand in hand with the core values and what we're trying to achieve. But we want them to be part of this community as well. So letting them know the 6 core values that are there and how we operationalize those at various points. So they're going to experience that at various points during interview processes. There's not a standard operational approach to it, but I can share you from our standpoint in student affairs. I mean, those things are absolutely, we're looking for people who can write for the brand, if you will, who want to look at those 6 core values and say, yeah, I can ascribe to that. That's how I'm going to lead my experience here at A&M and have the ability to come in here and model that and work with students. And that same leadership philosophy we talked about with student-run, student-led, who on occasion have to back off and say, what are you going to do about that? And I'm as guilty as anyone else that's here of trying to solve problems as opposed to working with students so they can identify and help solve them themselves. And so I've been on occasion said, no, you need to let them do that. And it begins to take root after a little while. What's a facilitated advising process so that we're not doing things for everybody. We're actually empowering people to do that in the future themselves.
Well, it sounds like one of the big qualities that you hire for is mentorship.
Without a doubt, you can characterize it in a number of different ways, and mentorship would certainly be one of those to frame that with who we want here working and the kind of relationship we want to have with students. But it's also that relationship remodel that we want the senior student to have with the freshman student, and the sophomore student to have with the freshman, or the senior with the junior, and all through that stratification. We want them to continue to mentor. That service leadership concept, if you will, as well, where you're teaching and then you're allowing them to go out on their own. And if you're going to have failures, that's okay. We learn from our failures. The hazard's not learning from your failure and continue to do it over and over again. But that's why we're there as mentors and those servant leaders to be able to make that happen.
Well, the true definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results.
And that doesn't mean, we don't fall into those traps. But the reality is we have the opportunity here with regards to the nature of our work that allows for those things to occur. And again, if it happens in a normal setting or in a high impact practice, how do we encourage the reflection and the learning that transpires from that so that, and again, 5 years from now, wherever that student is, that former student at that point, they're not going to have to go through that. Or if they do, they've learned from it in the past. They've got the confidence to be able to learn from it in the future and to move forward.
It makes perfect sense. And when I think about change management and even resistance to change, what you see the output, we call it the iceberg theory of change. You see the output, the 10, the 13% above the water, which is, your outcomes. But below that, you have your processes, you have your structures, and then everything around it is the mental models. And if you really want to make a change, you have to change mental models and then the structures and then the processes. You hire for mental models and obviously expertise, excellence, and all your 6 qualities. but then you have the structures and the processes in place, which spits out, for lack of a better word, a graduate who has all of these core values. And that's the holistic approach that you take to education.
Absolutely. One of the real interesting and exciting aspects about A&M right now is the process right now of going through to looking out to 2030 and where does higher education need to be in 2030 and how do we get out in front of this? And so, again, I think a lot of things are in play with regards to higher education from a national framework. Where should we be and what do we look like? And to have faculty sit in a room and openly talk about the future of a research university, a decade plus away, and what does that look like? And how do we begin to cross-pollinate and create collaborative initiatives and to solve the global challenges of this world and to make that part of that very nature and fabric of an institution from the faculty, from the staff, and involving the students in that. That is a real interesting dynamic. And I think it's the core values that undermine that construct of saying, we can do this. We're trained to be excellent in this framework and not afraid to move forward in ways that others may not have thought about and be open to different influences on that. So again, it's right now we're in a real unique environment at A&M and some of the thought leaders that are beginning to conceptualize decades away as opposed to 5 years from now.
And that's what we need to do. I mean, I've got one client who is wanting me to help them with a project to visualize what they're going to look like in the next 20 to 50 years. And that is an ambitious project, but at the same time, I think it's really needed given where we are right now. We're at a place where we can make and we should be making those kind of changes because the model's changing, the generations are changing. There's so many different factors. Technology is accelerating faster than we've ever seen it in our lifetime or any lifetime. And so with all these factors, going out and looking 20 years out makes perfect sense. We're getting close to the end of our time. I wanted to touch just briefly on the Texas A&M Foundation and the current capital campaign. I was intrigued by it. You've got those 3 pillars of learning, which wrap right into that future vision of A&M. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an outstanding piece. So it's the tagline, if you will, is talking about lead by example. But the basic fundamental framework of those 3 principles that we believe are just part and parcel of where it needs to transpire here. And so when we think about transformational education, you led off talking about, the expectations in the transactional way, but we're really talking about transformational experiences that are going to be more life-changing for those students. And how do we expose them as well as ourselves? We do the same thing looking at when we hire in a new staff member, faculty member, what are we doing transformationally for them that's going to continue to develop those individuals? And then be able to really articulate those for, former students and other donors who can invest in those experiences and those opportunities. The discovery and innovation is really focused on, the campus for the world. What are the major problems that are out there? And you begin to see that link with what we talk about, identifying a problem and how do you bring solutions to it. So again, you've got discovery and innovation for the world linked in with the core values and that leadership concept that really begin to blend that says, through my experiences, I can begin to better understand what the issues are. And that in itself is unique of, how do you identify what the problem is? And most people have challenges doing that. The military talks about bottom line up front. What is it? You may remember what a bluff is from your experience, but so what is it we're looking at here that we need that's the issue, and how do we bring about change? And then those changes through transformation discovery, that impact that we can have on Texas, on the United States, and really globally with regards to what we're doing. And that comes in a variety of ways and really brings forth that servant leadership concept as well of selfless service and the kind of things we're going to do. It's one thing to lead a valuable life, but to lead a life of value is a little different, where you're contributing to the betterment of our community, our state, our nation, our world. That's really the piece that's there. And we can do that through a variety of means, research being one of those, but also through the individual impact that you can make by living out your core values and bringing that experience forward.
Wow, that's big. That one statement, you can live a life of value versus a valuable life. Huge. Well, Dan, thank you so much. What's next for you? What's next for A&M?
I think right now really throwing ourselves into this Vision 2030 concept of where we're going to be and what the future looks like for an A&M as one of the premier research universities in the world, and the nature of that and how it exists for our students. But, and then some days it's right back to, sitting down talking for me and what I do, visiting with student body presidents and leaders and going back on the day-to-day piece of really investing some time in those young men and women so they can become the best possible version of themselves. And that's, again, you get to look forward and think out there, but you also get to spend some real quality time with your, hands in the dirt, working with students that are developing themselves. So to me, it's the best of both worlds. I get the contact today and I get the forward thinking for tomorrow. And that keeps me thriving every single day.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been fabulous. And speaking very frankly, as you know, I generally do, I've not heard this from any other higher ed institution other than service academies. And from my perspective, you guys are doing it right. So keep up the great job.
Thanks so much, Drum. And thank you for what you're doing and carrying forward this message. I think higher ed is valuable and it's absolutely critical to the future of our country. And if we lose sight of that, then I think we're going to suffer as a nation.
Amen, brother. Again, thank you, sir. Thanks for listening this week. And a special thank you to this week's special guest, Dr. Dan Pugh of Texas A&M, about what goes into their special sauce for creating great leaders that they've been doing for so many years. Our next guest is Dr. Judy Kellstrom, the former director of the UC Davis Biotechnology Program and co-director of the Howard Hughes Institute for Integrative Medicine into basic science training programs. Judy built Davis's biotech program from the start and will talk to us about how to build a cross-functional program that has led to multiple million-dollar startups and some of the top researchers in the country. If you like this podcast, please take a minute to subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app, would you please take a moment to give us a rating and review? You can find out more information and show notes at changinghighered.com. And if you have guests and/or other topics you'd like to hear about, please email us at podcast@changinghighered.com to let us know. Remember, creating sustainable higher ed institutions requires three things: taking a holistic view of your institution, aligning strategies, structures, and processes, and ensuring stakeholders are attuned to where you're going. Without any of those three things, you won't get your institution where you want it to go. Until next time.